All right, guys, thanks for joining us. Slight logistical issue for you, which is how many people heard the talk this morning when we talked about, okay, good. The logistical issue is Dave had some notes about what we were supposed to talk about. He didn't read them, and we talked about what we were supposed to talk about now. So we were supposed to have a long conversation about sleep this morning, and that's all we were meant to talk about. So anyways, I'm just gonna riff and tell you some amazing stuff and blow your minds, hopefully. And I'm sure you're gonna enjoy it. I just want to make sure I'm not redundant and wasting your time for things we already discussed. So first of all, the thing we said we were going to talk about was a Harvard study, if you remember the title, if anyone saw that, about the 5 things you can do to add time to your life. And the specific amount they said, it was actually more for women than it was for men, 14 years. That's what they said, right? So if you do these things, you're going to extend your life by 14 years. And I promise you won't need to take notes. For those of you who are taking notes on that particular thing, you're going to be disappointed. But I'm going to tell you scientifically, before we get into that, how we think about life extension. Because where they say if you do these 5 things, you'll be underwhelmed, I promise. I think we can do a lot more, and you can get to 150, maybe 200, if you do what we're thinking, right? And Scotty's an example there. He's actually 150, but you can't tell. Yeah, yeah. So the way we look at, so you understand, we look at the genome. That's where our sort of piece of this puzzle is, and all those pieces are needed. Everyone that's out there is building this new healthcare industry or model, which is what we really need, which is true healthcare, right? Which is how do we not get sick? Doctors should be paid to keep you healthy, and if you're getting sick, their pay should be docked. That's what should happen, right? So, yeah. And by the way, there are countries that do that. There's areas in Asia where that actually is the healthcare model. As soon as someone's sick, you're not paid, right? Because that should be the job, right? Yeah. So now we're going to discuss how to do that. And really how to do that is taking the ancient learnings, which we already knew for so long, that was removed from our knowledge base and replaced with something very different and relearning it. But now learning it with really cool science and technology that can drive it even further than it ever has been. So our genome, you have 50 trillion some odd cells that make you up. Every single cell in your body has this human instruction manual that is telling those cells what to do. So if it's a heart cell, it reads the heart section and it does that job. A liver cell reads the liver section, it does that job. And they only read that section. We don't yet know how that happens, but we know that's what's going on. And the challenge is we don't know how to read that book properly. And that's what Dave was talking about. That's what Naveen was talking about, that genetics itself has been underwhelming. Because the things that we've been doing is rare genetic conditions, traits, ancestry, not translating it to chronic disease and aging, which is what we want to deal with, right? So how do we do that? We have to read this book and understand the language, be fluent in this language before we can actually apply it, which is what we've been working on. And if you do that, you can then truly transcend all this nonsense we're dealing with and prevent disease. So I'm going to give you some examples, and that's what I meant by the riffing. So I'll give you a simple example of BRCA. How many of you have heard of the BRCA gene? Right? So it's a scary 4-letter word for women where you don't want it. Yeah, and so we just heard here, I don't have it, right?
But the doctor say I could have, so don't think you.
Right. And that's what a doctor will tell you. Good news, you don't have it. So now, who knows what the BRCA gene does? Right? So what it actually does is it repairs tumors. So when you get cancer, it's supposed to go fix it. If you don't have a good version of it, you die from cancer. So it doesn't cause cancer, right? But medically, what I said over there earlier today is that the research dollars are funding what drug can we make, right? So what can I up and down regulate to create something that's valuable in terms of a drug, which means you need to be sick. If you're sick, I want to treat you. Not how do you not get sick, right? So now BRCA, let's park that for a second. BRCA is if you have breast cancer, this is supposed to fix it. And some women don't have a good version. It also it repairs DNA, which slows down your aging, cellular regeneration. It does a lot of things in the repair world, right? So now, why does breast cancer happen? Let's look over here. This is what we call functional genomics. So some women in their hormone cascade, and men and women do the same thing, by the way. Women just do it monthly, men do it daily. So we have like a menstrual cycle that happens every day, 24 hours, right? So you make progesterone, which you convert into testosterone, which you then convert into estrogen. Some women just make a lot more of that estrogen. So the genes that are instructing each step, you can have a fast or slow version. So if you are in that bucket that is just a lot of estrogen, you're estrogen dominant. So park that. That's step 1 of 3. If you are estrogen dominant, you then have to determine what do you convert that estrogen into. Because it's not estrogen that you're clearing in that monthly cycle. It's a metabolite, either 2, 4, or 16 hydroxyestrogens are what they're called. 2 is great, clean stuff that you want. 4 and 16 are highly toxic, right? So that's step 2 of 3. Step 3 of 3 is now that I'm making this toxic metabolite from my heavy load of estrogen, how well do I get rid of it? Now the detox system should kick in. The same glutathione pathways that I was talking about that I don't have in my stomach, but I do have up here, are meant to clear that. Your antioxidative pathways are meant to clear that. Some people don't do that job well. And you can determine from the genes how well you do that job, because what quality of the instruction do you have? Slow, medium, fast, right? So if you are that woman that's estrogen dominant, estrogen toxic, is not doing well in the hormone clearance pathways, the detox pathways, now all of a sudden you have something causing inflammation. And do that for 20, 30, 40 years, it's a problem, right? So even then, this is not a prescription for you are at risk for breast cancer. What then happens is the environment, nutrition, lifestyle load. How many women, in fact, I can tell you how many women, 85% of North American women will be on the birth control pill for 10 years plus, right? Dumping more estrogen into that estrogen fire, fueling that estrogen toxicity that you can't clear. How many women go into hormone replacement therapy without knowing that cascade? I'm not saying hormone therapy is good or bad. I'm saying it's good if you do what your body needs, not the one size fits all, right? Where do you actually intervene? Where in that cascade? So if you're doing it wrong, more estrogen, fueling more estrogen toxicity, more inflammation, right? How many women now have to deal with hormone disruptors? You know, something as simple as a Teflon-coated frying pan, you don't know actually mimics estrogen as it enters your body. Grocery receipts, the chemicals in your lawn that make it so beautiful. A woman that golfs frequently is constantly taking in things that are mimicking and disrupting your endocrine system as they enter, right? So now all of a sudden you have that profile of I'm not doing these jobs well, and my genes determine that. That puts me at risk if I also exaggerate that because I'm designed for what my ancestors did, not for this current reality of too many chemicals, too bad with the food, and et cetera, right? That's women for whom now the inflammatory state is getting so high that when she reaches menopause, and you wonder why do women get breast cancer? Not all, but for the most part at that time, menopause, because you no longer have a menstrual cycle to get rid of that heavy load of every month making this estrogen toxicity. And what does your body do? It says, well, here's a toxin that I can't clear because my detox system doesn't work that well. I don't want my organs and vasculature getting damaged. So I'm going to go store it in fat and protect myself. And where do women have fat? Right? So, and what's in those, the breast where the fat is, it's all these glands that were designed to deliver milk. The cellular structure is not designed to cope with inflammation and toxins. Our gut, our lungs, these are first line of defense that are designed to deal with these things. This is not. So that's the woman for whom, at that age, she has all the perfect storm, all the pieces to lead to breast cancer. And that's when BRCA is supposed to get to work and go fix it, right? But all we ever ask is, do you have BRCA or not? That's genetics, right? And look at the first answer was like, I don't have it, lucky me, right? Well, the good version is what she has. She has the strong version. So if, God forbid, she got breast cancer, she'd do a good job of repair. So that is where we can go now. And the reason why we can go there is we spent a good 3 years sitting in front of 7,000 people, one by one by one. And we understood if they had the profile, what were the environment, nutrition, lifestyle habits of the healthy and the sick. And that's really the combo. Here's your profile. Here's what you're doing right and wrong. Here's good news and here's bad news, right? So there's some things that are obvious, you know, and there's some things that are completely counterintuitive. So I'm going to speak to some of the counterintuitive stuff because that's what you probably need to know, right? So another example, tell you a few more stories. Sticking to female hormones for a second, then I'll go on to some other stuff. My niece, which is a big driver and motivator in terms of why we went from a research company to flipping over into like, how do we help everyone? Bryce, by the way, who's sitting there with the funky hat, he's one of the co-founders and put us all together. So he put me and Mansoor together, who was our chief scientist officer and helped us on the research side, and we tried to take that research and make it apply to all these problems, right? He understood functional genomics. Why do we fix everything? So my niece had an anxiety attack. My niece, my sister, and my mother lived together. And once you hear this story, you're going to resonate because this is such a common story, especially for young women. My mother asked me to call somebody. They don't know what to do, so I called my pediatrician friend, and normal response. He said, yeah, sounds like an anxiety attack, the classic symptoms, but it also sounds like she's doing well now. You know, she couldn't breathe properly, all that, but it sounds like it's over. If it happens again, let me know. So it did happen again, and that time she actually fell over. She kind of semi-passed out and fell over and hurt herself. So my mother and my sister said, can you please take her somewhere? Canadian healthcare system, you go to the emergency room, you have to wait 8 hours, right? So said, can you do something to get her in quicker? We think maybe she hurt herself. So anyways, we went there, we spent 6 hours, so we saved 2 hours because of my connections, right? And we then found out that there was nothing wrong. She had gone through, she was really complaining about her leg, so x-ray, blood tests, all this stuff. But the answer was, if it happens again, let us know. And at that time, I knew that meant, if it happens again, there's a diagnosis, and she's getting a pill, right? She's going to be on an anxiety pill. And stupid me, at that time, I actually was thinking of it in the anxiety bucket, even though I know what I know, right? Because you're reacting. So it did happen again. And that time, my mother called me screaming. I was actually on a Zoom call, so I didn't answer, and she kept calling and calling and calling and calling. So I finally picked up, and she said, why aren't you answering? I'm on a Zoom call. She said, your niece has run away from home. And this is completely out of character for this girl, like sweet, innocent. She never went outside by herself, by her own choice. She's just very innocent in her nature, right? So I said, this doesn't sound like her. There's something going on that's beyond this, and she's probably not gone far. I'll come, we'll figure it out. So I got there. She's literally standing outside down the street, because for her, that's running away, right? And I got her in the car. I said, tell me, is it like social media, bullying? Like, what is happening, right? This usual suspects. And so what she said to me really was like resounding. She said, I don't know. She was just running away from that space, the feeling. She didn't know what was causing it, right? So being outside, at least there's a breath of fresh air, and in the answer, you're going to find out why that was important. So I then pulled out her DNA test. I had her results, and stupid me didn't look at it. So I did look at it, and the first thing that clicked for me was, wait a second, my mom's been calling me like clockwork every month. This is related to her hormone cycle, her menstrual cycle. So I asked my mother, what part of the cycle was this happening in? He said, you know what, you're right. It was right before the cycle was starting. So my niece doesn't produce enough estrogen, right? It's very clear in her hormone pathway. So when you don't do that, that delta value of like, here's where I'm at. And in the beginning, when you have your lowest hormone level, she was way down here, right? So she even lower than the average woman. At that time, she was being homeschooled because of COVID. In Toronto, we had one of the worst lockdowns in the world. She hadn't been outside in like 4 months in the winter in Toronto, which meant she got 0 vitamin D for 4 months, right? Of the 22,000 genes that make up your genome, 10%, like 2,000, require vitamin D to function. So imagine 10% of all these biological functions, if you don't have vitamin D, they don't work. So all of a sudden, systems all in a fritz, going crazy, right? Why did it express here? Like her crazy uncle, she can't experience dopamine properly, right? So her ability to bind and experience pleasure and reward is way down here. There's a gene called DRD2 that determines how dense those receptors are, and hers are slim to none. Her clearance of that chemical is ultra fast. The COMT protein or gene that some of you may have heard of, she clears it super, super fast. So she feels it like that, and it's gone before it started. So she's already teetering on, I don't feel good, right? It leads to depression, addiction, or reward-seeking behavior, entrepreneurialism, right? So, yeah. And I've had all three, by the way. So now, the pieces of the puzzle, it wasn't a problem. It wasn't anxiety, right? It was a biological failure that was genes, plus environment. She was inside with no vitamin D. Nutrition, you could also call that nutrition, lack of vitamin D, right? And lifestyle, she wasn't moving. She wasn't doing anything that would move her dopamine levels. Cold, heat, exercise, etc., all that stuff. So anyways, when we figured that out, all we did was give her L-theanine, a supplement that boosts your dopamine levels, right? And we gave her a high-dose vitamin D. So at the very beginning of her cycle, the next month, 10,000 IU, for like 2 days, then we did 5,000 IU for maintenance, and then we did 2,500 the rest of the month, right? Didn't have a problem since then. It's been 2 years, right? She has not had the problem since then. So this is like peak COVID winter. Since then, it's been about 2 years, I think, right? So she would have been on an anxiety pill right now, right? That would have been her story. And think about how many young women have that story. Many, 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 many. Depression, anxiety, all the stuff that's going on. And then the environmental of like, I can't deal with what's happening on school. I can't deal with what's happening in social media. I can't. That's the load that they were not designed for, right? And the reality is, you think about our genes as, we are like our ancestors, and you think about grandma and grandpa, but your genes are 200,000 years old. And this is why there's so much illness. The way everything works inside is the same of people of 200,000 years ago. Modern agriculture only started 10,000 years ago. It's a blip in time. The current industrialization and pollution and chemicals and all that only started 100 years ago, right? So the way we now live today, and the maybe 3 generations that have been through it, we are not yet caught up to the way we live, right? And this is why it's so important to understand where are the red flags, the holes and gaps. What do we not do? What's that job that my body doesn't do? So I'll give you another couple examples. We talked about illness and disease. Let's talk about the opposite, performance, right? So we're working with a lot of athletes. We do a lot of NBA, NHL, high performance guys. And what we often find is people reach these plateaus, right? And so being optimal is also important. Why not be the best you could possibly be instead of getting stuck, which is what often happens when you're trying to do something. Hormones are highly implicit there. Understanding your net result and what you're supposed to be, do I look like, and these are crude examples, but am I Kim Kardashian or am I Kendall Jenner? Right? They're sisters, but they look entirely different. They have one parent that's different. One is much more estrogen dominant, and Kendall, the supermodel, she's very slim, tender, less female features, breasts are much smaller, no hips. That's androgen dominance, testosterone dominance, right? Both have their benefits and both have a whole suite of problems that come along with them if you don't understand what loads you're putting on them. So again, in trying to reach that optimal fitness level, I can't put on muscle, I can't lose those last 5 pounds, why do I store fat here and everybody else doesn't? All of that is understood, by opening up this manual and seeing what you do, right? So simple example, we have a female athlete that we were working with who was an Olympian, and she just couldn't get past that sort of silver level, right? She trained harder, worked harder, was willing to do it. She was gritty and just got down and dirty and did the work, just got stuck at this plateau. So we were actually working with Red Bull Performance. They have an amazing performance center. They sponsor 1,500 athletes, so they built their own center to make sure that those guys win. And now other athletes use that place because it's so well done. And so they said, we don't know why she's stuck. She's just willing to do the work. She just can't improve. So because of her estrogen dominance, she had trouble burning the fat, right? She was big and strong. That's what estrogen does for you, by the way. It's hard to get ripped and lean, right? The other thing is, because she trains so hard in that circadian rhythm of your hormone cycle, there's certain times of the month where women can't lift heavy things, right? That first week, great. Go lift as heavy as you can. Put on the muscle. Use your strength. In the second week, you're going to rip a tendon. You're going to break something, right? Because the estrogen levels skyrocket, and all of a sudden you're much more inflamed and you're prone to injury. And she kept getting injured, which is why she had to keep stopping. Then she would be fighting, and then the mood and behavior component. So in her mood and behavior component, I talked about serotonin on the other stage. Her serotonin was off. When your serotonin is off, and you often experience things at an extreme version of what they are, and you're often frustrated, irritated, bothered, you're also stressed. And your body knows stress is not good. Cortisol is not good. So it doesn't want you to be stressed. So it forces you to lean on coping mechanisms. And she kept eating, not knowing how much she was eating. So she had her strict meal plan, right? This is what you're supposed to do. But there was the grazing in between that she literally did not do. No, she was doing. She perceived it as real, that hunger. This is what serotonin does to you. It causes these coping mechanisms. For somebody, it could be something else, but for most people, it's food. How do I get happy quick? That's what your brain wants to do, right? So now all of a sudden you can personalize, again, red flags. Here's my holes and gaps, right? Here's the things that I need to watch out for. Here's where I'm actually doing better. So because of her estrogen, she was a lot stronger than the other women, right? Estrogen actually gives you that mass and strength, that deadlifting. That's not testosterone, that's estrogen. But there was everything else going wrong, right? So again, working with her a couple months, no more injury, no more problems. She's now doing really well. But But I'm going to move on to another thing because this is the number one thing people ask us about, which is Alzheimer's. So when it comes to Alzheimer's, it's always, I don't want to know, right? I don't want anxiety for the next 30 years. And the challenge is there's a belief that it's either coming or it's not coming, right? I have it. Is it in my genetics? Do I have Alzheimer's? That's not at all what's happening. The reason you're seeing so much more is because we're just living longer, right? A couple generations ago, 50 was good news. Now it's 100, right? So the things that get you there, you're there for longer to be exposed to those things, right? Now for each one of us, there's a different thing. It's not all the same. I was talking to, forgot the gentleman's name, a clinician actually right here in LA, that was doing some research and found that today, 68% of today's Alzheimer's is actually airborne, meaning things that we breathe, right? Driving in this city's traffic is equivalent, I think, to 2 packs of cigarettes, the average commute. I was also told that. So anyways, the things that we breathe, the pollution we breathe, the pesticides that we breathe, the mold that we breathe, all this stuff that's airborne is causing inflammation. Some people don't have the genetics to deal with that inflammation. So the glutathione pathway is what helps you bind onto toxins, send them to the liver to metabolize and get rid of them. Just like when you drink alcohol, you know you do that. Your liver gets rid of stuff. Well, there's these traffic cops in the blood finding all these problems and sending them to the liver, right? So if you don't do that job well, they're now circulating in the blood, causing inflammation. And if you do that for long enough, this is why chronic disease is not acute, it's chronic, because it takes decades for it to turn into a problem. You started getting sick. If you have Alzheimer's at 60, it started when you were 30, right? You were already inflamed, you were already sick. Whatever you were doing, and there's multiple reasons, I'm going to get into them, but the first one is airborne. So understanding how you deal with all of what you're breathing in, that we are not ancestrally designed to breathe in. Our ancestors didn't have to deal with these things, so our bodies haven't yet caught up to that. All of a sudden, causing inflammatory insults, leading to cognitive decline, right? Neural inflammation, literally brain damage. That's one. Another big one is how we deal with food. So in our Alzheimer's report, we look at insulin response and carbs and starches, and people say, what does that have to do with all this stuff? A major inflammatory insult. The AMY gene determines very precisely how well you convert starch into glucose, right? Some people eat a bowl of pasta and go run. Some, like myself, do that and they crash and need to take a nap. It's a combination of that gene and your ability to manage your insulin response, 2 different genes. So there's some combinations in there for which, if you are eating like the average American, it is a recipe for Alzheimer's and dementia. And if you decide to not eat like that, it is a recipe for preventing it. Truly, it's that simple. Well, it's hard to do it for 20, 30 years, right? You have to make that effort to do it. But that is the dial you have to turn, which is, for me, it's airborne. The things that I breathe are going to be in my blood and are going to cause me to have cognitive decline from neural inflammation. For somebody else, it's the things that I eat are going to cause me to have inflammation from my insulin response and the starch not being metabolized properly. It's going to lead to neural inflammation. There's even more nuances where brown people like me have an insulin response from fat. All the research is done on Western European white people, right? So the data that's been told that fat does not cause an insulin response is not true. So again, for some people, and this is where being precise through your genome, you can determine that for some people, eating saturated fat and having a steak every day will actually lead to cognitive decline. But for a very small subset of people. And that's why Dave mentioned the Western African genetics that he has, which we don't understand. But cardiovascularly, that's how he's designed. So, and now the big sort of red flag when it comes to Alzheimer's is 80% of the research dollars are spent on men, but 80% of the cases are in women, right? So why do women fare so much worse and have so much more propensity going back to estrogen toxicity, right? The same thing. While you're dealing with the airborne, the food, and the couple other things we're going to get into, you're also dealing with producing internal toxic insults, right? And it's slowly trickling. Every month you're producing more and more of a dose of this thing, and you're just causing inflammation. And eventually when you get to that age where by the time you're 70 years old, you've lost 70% of your mitochondria. So your body's ability to be resilient and fight back, and this is why it takes a while before you cross that threshold from inflamed to sick. right? Your body can fight when you're younger. The hormone levels are good. Mitochondria are strong and resilient. As you age, that's all depleting. And all of a sudden you reach this axis where it's sick instead of just inflamed, and the inflammation you didn't even know. So this is why for women it's so much worse and so important to understand estrogen toxicity. You eliminate that, which is so easy to do. It's supplements that can either slow down the conversion. We've literally studied, and this is part of the work that Bryce did, by the way, kudos to him, is what are the actual ingredients that will actually regulate the gene, up or down regulate, and make it work harder or slower. We literally know what those things are. So if you overly convert your testosterone into estrogen, there's literally supplements you could take, harmless, that will slow that down. If it's more of a detox problem, there's supplements you can take that will make up for that lack of detox capability, right? And that's the actionability that you have to draw out of this. So that's why women fare so much worse, and it's the same thing with cardiovascular. Men will have a cardiovascular event, they will survive, and then they'll be taught what to do. 66% of women will die on their first cardiovascular event with no previous warning signs, no symptoms. They don't even know they're sick, right? That first warning sign is the heart attack, right? And women, like literally it's 66%, look it up anywhere. That's the number. So it's so much more important for women to look at estrogen toxicity because that cofactor, that silent killer in the background, is drawing this sort of dual track towards these problems. So anyway, so moving forward, when it comes to cognitive decline, the last area, when we look at, there's a lot going on with micronutrients, hormones, and we looked at the estrogen side, but for micronutrients, it applies to both men and women. And we see that, again, going back to vitamin D, the cascade and why it's so important, because like I said, 10% of these functions that are not a function of Alzheimer's, but a function of all the things that your body needs to be doing, for which if they're not doing, there's a heavy load on everything else, and eventually inflammatory state leads to disease, right? So your vitamin D pathway isn't just, let me take a blood test and see how much vitamin D I have, right? That's a very simplified version of what you actually need to do. What you need to do is understand that step one is I get vitamin D out of the sun and I put it into my blood where I use it. Step two, in an entirely different gene, is I then transport it to the cell where I actually need it. Step three is once it gets to the cell, I actually have to bind it, and there's a binder. It's another gene altogether. And a lot of people they have the right amount in their blood, and their doctor tells them they're fine, but all the symptomology of low vitamin D is there because they don't transport it and bind it. And the solution is also different. It's not take 10,000 IU in the morning, it's split it 2-3 times a day, right? Because you can't transport and move it fast enough. This will improve mood. This will improve bone health. This will improve skin. It's a cofactor to all the hormone stuff that's going on. Anyways, like I said, 10% of human biochemistry. So it's very important to understand that because there's another big trigger that people don't connect to all these chronic conditions we have, including cognitive decline. So, with that all be said, there's one more thing I'll tell you about because it's probably, well, not probably, it is the number one killer, cardiovascular disease, right? That's the one thing that everyone needs to know. And also, when we look at our data, there's very few people that are doing well here. It's actually shocking to find somebody that has the good genes here, right? So most people need to know about this. Most people are likely to find this to be true, which is cardiovascular disease typically doesn't happen in the heart. It usually happens in the arteries around the heart. They get inflamed, they then get calcified, or there's a cholesterol buildup, or something along those lines happen. Then eventually that ticker stops getting the blood and it stops ticking, and then you're done, right? So why does that all happen? We can genetically determine the quality of your what's called endothelial, this cell membrane inside your arteries, which is where the blood's actually sort of touching and flowing, right? There's different quality versions of that. Some people have stainless steel, resilient, grandma smoking till she's 100 quality arteries. And some people have paper thin, highly prone to inflammation, which by the way is a lot of us. Most of us are in the medium bucket, which we don't do that job so well. So now you have this, let's park that for a second. A lot of us have bad hardware. Even then you could be living on a beach somewhere, eating fish with nice sun and no stress, and you're never getting sick because you weren't born sick. So let's move on to what makes you sick. Going back to the detox pathway, some of us don't do that so well. You're actually missing some genes, right? So the things that are getting in now cause inflammation. when the inflammation is here and your methylation cycle, which some of you may have heard of, which is supposed to fight the inflammation, some of us don't do that so well. Now all of a sudden that perfect storm of bad hardware, too many toxins in the blood, can't fight the inflammation being caused, this is now inflamed. No warning sign, no signal. This is why you see 35-year-old soccer players and Olympic sprinters drop dead of a heart attack, because they've compressed 40 years of exercise into a decade, right? And they've caused crazy inflammation from oxidation, from all that cardiovascular activity, and this thing is inflamed. What is the body's response? It will actually send cholesterol as a hormone to this location to reduce the inflammation. That's what happens. Cholesterol is sent here to literally, as a Vaseline, smooth things out. And when the cholesterol meets toxicity, it hardens and gets deposited, and that's the beginnings of that cholesterolemia. And some people also don't do a good job of that. ApoE is a gene that some of you may have heard of, which is a lipid transport gene. How well do you actually move cholesterol around in your body, right? And so some people don't do a good job there. So that's, again, that perfect storm of, it's not, I have a propensity towards heart disease. What's my hardware? How well do I do with the things that cause inflammation? How well do I fight the inflammation, right? And then what am I actually doing? So it's a combination of these things to consider. And that's where most of us being in that bad bucket, most of us living in the wrong environment, most of us eating the wrong foods and not exercising the right way or exercising at all, you wonder why there's so much cardiovascular disease. And you should also know that all of that is entirely preventable. 100% preventable. You weren't born sick. Anything that you're not born with, you don't have to have. That truly is a choice, right? If you understand why these things happen. So I should give you the answer on the Harvard thing, and there was a sign that there's 15 minutes left. So the Harvard answer was this. They studied 70,000 people. We studied 7,000, so we're humble about their data. They said, don't smoke, not more than 1 drink a day, exercise 3 times a week, eat good, I don't even know what that means, right? And reduce your stress, right? And they're saying for the average American, that will take you from 78, I think, to 90 something, right? Because that's how sick we are. We're not doing anything great. We're just doing what we're supposed to do. So all we're saying is in these buckets of what were these things again? These were environment, nutrition, lifestyle. The things that I'm saying are a load on your genes, right? What do I eat? That's nutrition. How do I exercise? That's lifestyle, right? Smoking, that's environment. What toxins am I taking in? So they're saying the same thing, but they're breaking it down to the simplest, here's the absolute minimum that you should be doing. But nobody's doing it. That's why we're saying that with this data, testing 70,000 people, we will give you 14 extra years. That was the result. So if you were to park that and say, I'm going to dive into my genome and find out exactly what my body needs from me and what I need to do, how many years can you add if this will give you 14? And I know in this room, we're probably beyond this comment, right? But that's the American reality, which is why we spend $3.6 trillion a year on chronic disease. That's just chronic disease. That's not the entire healthcare budget. That's just chronic disease, entirely preventable. So that's all I had to tell you today, which is if you do this stuff, dive into your genome, understand your environment, nutrition, lifestyle risks, starting with your load, like what am I doing wrong, and then what do I need to do right, I don't see why 150 is a problem. If this can get you to 90, this is the CDC saying that, right? See, this came from between CBC and Harvard, so 150 shouldn't be a problem. Anyways, with that, we'll open it up for questions if there are any. Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, so thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem.
So when I learned about the toxic estrogen from my own report that you shared, a lot of people, like you said, say, okay, well maybe I'm going to take extra estrogen, and they don't know that they make the toxic form, right?
Yeah.
So that's one thing, but my question is, well, what about these women who do make the toxic estrogen, but are put on progesterone cream? Because if progesterone is the precursor, then it's still going to...
Same thing, yeah. So you can map, so progesterone goes to testosterone, goes to estrogen.
But all
right?
these women are being told to buy over-the-counter progesterone
So
cream.
if you ask their clinician to show you the hormone cascade, they probably don't know the answer, right?
Right?
They don't know.
No,
And-
I don't think so. I do check all metabolites. And
You do.
It's all about balance. Yeah.
You do,
So far,
right?
medicine
You are not the average clinician.
But it's all about
Yeah.
balance. I agree
Yeah.
But it's about them.
So we wish that everyone was like you. That's the point, right? So we do this every day. Every day we work with functional medicine doctors. We have courses, we have training, we have all, and I can't tell you how many people are not like you, right? That don't know, and it's not their fault. They weren't taught, they weren't trained. It's not their fault at all. They were given a license to do something, but they were not armed with the right tools to do it. Simple as that. So part of what we're doing, and a majority of what our time is we're just educating as many people as we can educate, right? So whoever's in this room, now you know, check first, right? But the challenge is everyone else needs to know also, because this is like a nationwide problem. Anyway, any other questions? Yep.
If you wanted to live to 150, what would your top 3 strategies be?
So not knowing anything about yourself, sleep, right? Because you recover in your sleep. There's lymphatic drainage of the brain, lymphatic drainage, everything happens in your sleep, right? Environmental health is probably that single killer that we just don't pay attention to. So you are what you eat. We know that, right? But you don't only eat through your stomach. You also eat what you breathe. What does it mean? What are you putting into your blood? It's what you eat, what you breathe, and what comes through your skin. That's what ends up in your blood, right? So number 2, I would say, is environmental health. So number 3, there's a bunch of things that pop up for me. Innate cellular health, right? So if you can understand for yourself at the cellular level, what would cause inflammation, right? That's if your cells are healthy, you can't be sick. If your mitochondria is firing at full force, if there's no inflammation, if there's nothing to cause cellular dysfunction, you're going to live longer, right? What is aging, actually? The aging is your cells literally unraveling, the DNA unraveling, because your cells are suffocating from all these things that we're talking about, the environmental threats, the toxic threats, right? That's aging. So if your cells are healthy, you're not aging, right? Those are the 3, I think. Oh, sorry, you were first, sorry.
Okay.
Yeah.
For people that have done genetic testing in the past and got back a report that shows impaired methylation SNPs,
Yeah.
how would doing your test give you better, different, useful information?
Yeah, so it depends what you got. So typically, when it comes to methylation reporting, there's usually MTHFR, which is that sort of central star of the methylation cycle, right? Or cascade, I should say. But there's all these supporting characters, and you have to understand their jobs. Because if you don't methylate properly, you need to know where to intervene. Which chain is broken, right? Or which link, I should say, sorry. The other thing you need to understand is methylation doesn't end at methylation. COMT is the tail end, which is not part of methylation, right? So that functional interpretation, which is not what does this gene mean, it is how does the process work, right? What is the body doing? What's that job? Now let's go look at what genes instruct each step in that process. That's where you can take it from that probability-based stuff to very certain, answers. And methylation is one of it where it's key, because most genetic tests do tell you, here's your MTHFR, good luck, right? You could have the best MTHFR, everything else is horrible, you're not going to do well, right? And then in that cycle, it's, do I need B12? Do I need a specific version? Do I need a sublingual? Do I need an adenosine? Do I need a methylcobalamin? That's just one gene, right? Then there's the B9 complexes, folinic acids versus folic acid. So you know exactly where to intervene and with what, if you know the full cascade, right? So that's why we only look at pathways, as we call them, right? Sorry, go ahead.
So you said preventable, which is not reversible. It's just you kind of freeze where you are.
So prevention and reversal are the same thing in my mind. Meaning that if you have a chronic illness, unless you've damaged something, God forbid your kid was exposed to something and they're now bucketed in what we call autism, but it's actually neural inflammation and damage, that's hard to reverse, right? Something like cardiovascular disease is a lot easier to reverse. So I can't tell you how many people we've taken off of Lipitor, right? Yeah, off, gone, yeah. Female hormone issues are, again, I've mentioned this many times because it's where we do a lot of work. A lot of things get reversed. Often, by the way, it starts here. I can't tell you how many people solving their health problem starts with how they perceive it, right? They're actually creating, the people in this room, we can openly talk about things like manifesting your thoughts into reality, right? And that happens to a lot of people. The pain that they have, they just can't let go of. Right? The disease that they have, they can't let go of, even if they're given the solution. So often we help people by helping them how they think about the problem, and then the problem goes away. right? So you have to understand how you even perceive. Some people hold on to trauma. They hold on to pain. They just can't let go. Yeah.
Have you done any research on genes and EMFs, and specifically 5G or anything like that?
Yeah, so where we have looked at that is, again, going back to methylation, right? So what is supposed to be protective? And we have clearly seen that people that are poor methylators have a much bigger problem, right? So we live here, we work here. It's hard to escape here. A lot of people are moving to Montana and everywhere, but it's the truth is that methylation is supposed to protect you, and most of us don't methylate that well. So again, going back to what we said, you got to know where to intervene, right? PEMF, by the way, is a great counter to EMF and repairing the cells that are damaged, right?
Did they ask you to see that?
Yes, methylation is fully mapped out. Yeah. Yeah.
Just because it applies so nicely to this previous gentleman's question around chronic
Yeah.
reversal, share with the group if you can that what we found with Lyme and as chronic disease, we're reversing that because of the hormone.
Yeah. So what we found, us, meaning Bryce's clinic and our team, we were involved in the largest Lyme study in Canada, I think in the world maybe. It was like 800 people. And we tried to understand why there was so much variability, right? There's like, I don't even know I have it. There's, I'm okay, I have a flu, and there's, I can't get out of bed for 4 months. Same bacteria, same species, we're all human. Why is there so much variability in the outcome? What we found was that in the female population, going back to what we say, and when you start to understand the functional pathways, it always comes back to the same stuff. How healthy is the cell based on all these insults? A good 25% of women didn't even have Lyme disease. Did not have it. They've been taking pills for it. They literally did not. The symptomology gets put in a bucket. What is medical practice? I'm going to ask you some questions, and when it sounds like something I remember, I'm going to prescribe you something. Right? It's hard. There are tests you can do to detect the bacteria. Most people don't do that, right? So that's what we found, is that 25% of these women just had estrogen toxicity issues. That was it, right? They literally did not have Lyme. That's why women fare so much worse when it comes to Lyme than men. Not because we're women or we're men or whatever. It's because of that estrogen toxicity. And that's why only some women fare worse, right? And by the way, men also have estrogen toxicity. Some men, right? We have an NHL hockey player that came to us because he had man boobs, right? Gynecomastia. His problem was that he was not recovering, so his team gave him testosterone, a gel pack. It's called an androgel pack, which his pathway was to convert all his testosterone to estrogen. So he took that all in, exactly what you just said, and converted it all into estrogen. What's the solution? Maybe you need more. So they gave him more, right? And he had nice shiny hair and beautiful skin, but he had no libido and he had nice boobs, right? So that's what happened. So, that's why understanding the pathways are so, but anyways, that's why women have so much more acute expression of these problems because of that cofactor of the estrogen toxicity, which we don't even look at, right? Yeah.
What's the best way to find a practitioner who knows how to read the chart book? How to find somebody who can help you navigate all that?
So there's a couple answers, 3 answers to that. One answer is that's one thing that we thought was broken in genetic reporting. It was purposely built. So think of who built genetic tests and reports was geneticists. So they built it the way they used it, which is here's a report that I have to interpret because I'm a genius, right? Why don't we just make it easy to use? So our AI does the interpretation for you. We believe that if it's going to go to everybody and be sort of scaled so that everybody's being helped, you can't go through that mess of trying to figure out who to use, right? So first of all, we built what we call the GeneCast. So it's a personalized podcast of all these audio files that are really reading your results to you. So you're getting the reports, carb metabolization, hormones, whatever, all that stuff, but you're also getting this GeneCast, which is literally a virtual consult. So that's done. Second answer is we have a team that does that, where if there's something clinical in nature, mom had breast cancer, I don't want it, right? I'm feeling like I'm losing my mind, cognitive decline, like that type of thing, we would highly, highly recommend, even though the reports are highly prescriptive and directive, like let's dive into this more clinically. Third answer is there are a whole bunch of functional medicine doctors that we've trained that aren't part of our team that we could refer you out to, especially if there's a specific problem, right? Like Lyme disease or mold intolerance. There's people, Amelia Barrett was walking around here. She's a migraine specialist. She's been trained on our stuff. So if it's migraines, we send people to her as an example, right? So those are the three answers. You don't need it. If there's a problem that you actually need it for, the way we built the product, I should say, we believe you don't need it. But if it's beyond just optimization and self-serve, then yes, we have people that can help, or we can refer you out to a specialist. Yeah.
Does it tie the same way to like long COVID symptoms?
All right. We need another hour. All right. Okay. So long COVID is a mitochondrial disease. It's a cellular virus. So I should say the problem is cellular dysfunction, right? So the people that were in the hospital didn't go to the hospital because of COVID. They went because of respiratory and cardiac inflammation. So we know who those people are already. So if I have your DNA, I can predict if you're going to the hospital or not, right? That's one. Second is I'm getting a 0. I think that means no time left. So I'll just answer this question quickly. So where you have to focus is the mitochondria, right? That's your body's resiliency. That's a cell's ability to stay strong and fight. And we found, so by the way, I'm going to tell you one really cool fact. We surveyed our supplement subscribers that we were custom making for them at the time. About 200 people, 180 people replied that had COVID during the time that were on our product. 0 of them had a severe outcome, right? Not because we're amazing, but because we were supporting exactly the cellular dysfunction for them, the unique reason why they would have cellular dysfunction, so that COVID wasn't a problem for them. It was like getting the flu, and a very minor flu at that for these people. 100% of 180 people, right? Those are pretty solid numbers, right? And it was because we weren't trying to mask the problem. We were saying, what's broken in your genome? Let's support it. Let's turn those dials and make you do that job better. And now you can fight whatever's coming at you. And it had a lot to do with maintaining cellular health, primarily mitochondria. Yeah. There you go. We're out of time. Thanks, guys.